What's up, everybody? This is your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga, here to bring you another video with no frills, just the analysis. And today I'm going to be bringing you a new segment entitled Manga Monthly. Alright, so first of all, let me say this. I know that I was supposed to be doing a different video today to sort of kick off my new video segments. The one was about the, villains and or antagonists and protagonists, character profiles, and the other one was supposed to be about underrated anime or manga. But as I look at my schedule, I have a backlog, including this video. I have a backlog of about 7 videos that I need to do by at least this upcoming Sunday. So because they're time sensitive, and the other segment that I was supposed to start isn't really that time sensitive. So I'll probably start those new segments next Wednesday, next week. So like I said, this is a new segment, and first let me just say this. Shout out to, Jay the Relaxation D. I'm sorry I had to steal your shit, homie. But at least I told you I would do it, right? So, this video segment was inspired by Jay the Relaxation D, where he just, had a video where he sort of updated people on, what he was reading, and, how it was going, whether he liked it or disliked it, and, things like that. So basically my idea was to, create a monthly segment where I would just, chronicle everything that I'm currently reading. And because, I realized that the overwhelming majority of the videos that I upload to YouTube just don't reflect the diversity of what I read and what I watch. So I just wanted to, do this to, show, the kind of, diversity in the things that I read, but also because I wanted there to be some more interaction between me and the people who, watch my content. So, there would be some interaction, and let you in on some of the things that I like to read, and why I like to read it. Also, and this is the interesting part of this. Lately I've been getting into seinen manga more and more, and I am just now obsessed with the seinen demographic. So most of these, not most, for the next 6 months probably, the only thing that I'm going to be reading is only seinen and only manga. So in other words, I'm just going on an all-out seinen binge. And I've already started, which is, why you're going to get this new segment today. But there's, I think, 15, 16, there should be 16 series that I have on a list that I plan to read, back to back to back to back to back. And I'm not going to tell you which ones they are, because I want it, to be a surprise, and I want you guys to, be able to, follow along if you want to, when I, begin to talk about a new series. And also, I did this because I wanted to make, sort of, suggestions and recommendations to other people to, check out these series if they haven't read them. And also, you guys can, make recommendations and suggestions to me. But let me just tell you this. Just because you recommend something or suggest something does not mean that I will read it. Now, it may be the case that you recommend or suggest something that, I eventually will read and talk about, but that's not necessarily the case. So what I want to talk about today is, Berserk by Kentaro Miura. Great series, great dark fantasy series. The second thing I want to talk about is Vinland Saga by Makoto Yukimura. Another great series. This one's not really fantasy, but is a historical manga. So, historical manga. And the third one, which is the one I'm reading now. I sort of just started reading this one. I think I'm on volume 6. I'm in like the middle of volume 6. Vagabond by Takehiko Inouye. And wow. So that's one hell of a lineup right there. I mean, starting off with those 3 series, they're like, the cream of the crop of the seinen demographic. So first, let me talk about Berserk. So basically, before I even get into that, how this segment is going to work is, I'll talk about the series. I'll probably talk about the artwork a little bit, and then I'll give an overview. So not a review, but just sort of a general overview of what you can expect, a sort of first impressions sort of thing going on. So first, the first one that I read was Berserk, and I actually got put onto this. If you've seen, Persian Version Speaks recent first impressions video of Berserk, a lot of people in the Cloud Village were just, going on and on and on about Berserk and how awesome it was. So I was like, you know what? Let me give this series, a chance and see what's going on. And it just absolutely blew my mind. Just wow. So first of all, the aesthetics, the artwork is beautiful. I mean, there's just no other way to describe it. It's just absolutely, breathtaking. As far as I can tell, Kentaro Miura is probably the best overall artist that I've ever seen. And in fact, like before, when I used to read manga, I really didn't pay attention to art styles. But as I was reading Berserk, I just started to pay, more and more and more attention to, like, the particularities of, an author's art style. And some of the things that you'll notice about Kentaro Miura is that he can draw, in intricate detail. So he'll have, a scene that's just drawn in such, beautiful detail. But on the other hand, he can draw like large panoramic scenes. And I think it's very rare for an artist to be able to do both of those things like exceedingly well. So you'll either have an author who can do, large panoramic scenes or backgrounds, very well, but not detailed too well, but still, good enough, or vice versa. But Kentaro Miura can do, both exceedingly well. And when you look at his drawing, you can just tell that he takes a lot of care and a lot of diligence in his artwork. But I would say he's probably best known for his large panoramic, scenes. And what he'll do is, since it's sort of dark fantasy that involves, war and a lot of battles, he'll take a bird's eye view of the battlefield, and everything will just be like, literally, it will just be amazing. He draws, to perfect proportion, perfect scale, damn near perfect detail. And when you see one of these scenes, it's just so visually striking, because it's just I mean, a large, scene of a battlefield where, he's drawing like, 50 people engaged in combat. And it's just like, damn. Wow. I mean, the artwork is just absolutely amazing. And also another thing about his artwork, Berserk is an incredibly violent series for those of you who haven't read it. I mean, when I say incredibly violent, it'll probably be one of the most violent things you've ever read. Manga, novels, anything you've ever read or seen. That's how violent it is. So he's also very well known for how he, draws, certain violence. And so, like, you'll see a person get cut in half, and you'll see like their intestines flying all over the place, and like somebody will get hit with like a club, and their brain will just literally be knocked out of their skull. And you can just tell that he has, probably a very, very good understanding of anatomy, because, those sorts of, scenes are just drawn so well. So now let me get into an overview of what Berserk is actually about. Like I said, Berserk is a dark fantasy. And when I say dark fantasy, I'm putting a lot of emphasis on dark. Because like I said, I mean, I won't spoil it for you, but it's incredibly violent. So I mean, you should, have a strong stomach if you want to attempt to read this kind of stuff. And oh, but the violence, I would say this though, and Zipalagori actually did a video about this a couple of months ago, maybe like, oh man, it's actually been a while, maybe like 7 or 8 months ago now, where he talked about, some of the violence in Berserk. And he was right. Berserk is not violence for the sake of violence. It actually has a very, very strong philosophical and, to a certain extent, psychological importance throughout the manga. The violence in Berserk is designed to sort of question the nature of humanity. And, you'll start to see this and understand this when you get to things like how the idea of evil, which is, a sort of, entity within the Berserk universe or within the Berserk, cosmology. You'll start to get into the importance of violence when you get into, how the idea of evil was formed. And it's also, the violence in Berserk is also designed to force Guts. Guts is, the main character of Berserk, to ruminate about precisely what his purpose is in the world, and about, the type of, human being that he wants to be. So the way this is, visually depicted is through the symbol of, this beast who was like, chained within his subconscious. And when he starts to, lose control, that beast sort of, breaks free of its chains. And so, the violence in Berserk has a lot to do with, the struggles, the sort of psychological and to some extent ethical struggles of the main character as well. Although Guts is definitely, uh is he a Byronic hero or an anti-hero? I would probably say I'd probably say he's more of an anti-hero than a Byronic hero. So, that actually works into, his character archetype. The violence actually works into his character archetype as well. So the story of Berserk, what is it about? It's basically a revenge story that turns into, it's not quite clear actually what it's turned into, but it starts off as a revenge story. It's not quite an action adventure story because it's like, One Piece would be like an action adventure story, with some comedy thrown in. But Berserk is kind of not like that because the sort of the philosophical subtext is too strong to just label it as a, action adventure story and leave it at that. It's, part action adventure, part philosophical treatise, and plus at this point, the story is in like a transitionary period. So they're in the midst of, traveling to some place that they, have to get to. And so it's not quite clear precisely what the story has turned into. But it's certainly, starts off as a revenge story. But now that sort of revenge subplot is sort of, up in the air. It's not really clear if that revenge subplot or plot will continue. So it's sort of in a transitionary period right now. And basically what the story is about is that, Guts is a mercenary who joins a mercenary army called the Band of the Hawk. And the leader of the Band of the Hawk is Griffith, who will later become, Femto. And woof, if you haven't read that part, it's just like, damn, Femto is a real dark lord. But Griffith, man, he's as an antagonist, perhaps even a villain. I'm not sure if he's a villain or not, but he's definitely the antagonist of the story. Is one of the most complex characters that I've ever seen. And Griffith, he has this dream of, getting his own kingdom. And this idea of, the kingdom that sort of motivates and guides Griffith's actions, it functions as both, it functions on a symbolic level, but it also functions, on a very real, tangible physical level. Because, Griffith actually wants, a real, kingdom that he can control and rule over. But it also functions in a symbolic sense because it's meant to symbolize his great ambition and the greatness of his, the greatness of his will and the greatness of his character. And so it has a lot to do with, Griffith's, perhaps we can say, his narcissism, because I think a lot of this has to do with, Griffith's narcissism. And it also has to do with, Griffith's, superiority complex, because he grew up as a peasant in a world where, the strong are determined by, how rich and, how rich you are. And he grew up as a peasant, although he's, a genius basically, and he has to, grapple with, how the world, treats a person like him who has all the qualities of, virtue, maybe not virtue, but certainly of, that you would expect of nobility, but, places him on, the lowest rungs of society because he, he's a poor peasant. And the Band of the Hawk, over which, Griffith is the leader, has been commissioned by the King of Midland to, fight a war. And but Griffith, betrays the Band of the Hawk in a very, very ugly way. And I won't spoil that part because, that's the real crux of the story. So I won't spoil that for you. But, basically what happens is Guts gets, branded as a human sacrifice. But there's, this question about whether Guts is destined to be a sacrifice for Griffith, or whether or not he has some free will about, um in terms of, his relationship to Griffith. And basically that's the philosophical crux of the story. It's basically a story about, free will versus determinism. Whether or not, your actions are, predetermined, whether or not he will be used as a human sacrifice for Griffith, or whether or not he has some free will and he can fight against this, destiny. So that's basically an overview of Berserk. So now on to Vinland Saga. Now, getting into the artwork of Vinland Saga, I can say this. The artwork here is also, phenomenal, phenomenal artwork. And all of the series that I'll be talking about today have just, absolutely phenomenal artwork. And I think that in some ways, even though Kentaro Miura is the best overall mangaka that I've ever seen in terms of, artwork, in some ways, Yukimura is even better than Kentaro Miura. And here's why I say this. I say this because, his panoramic scenes and his backgrounds are not as good as Kentaro Miura's. Although, as the series go on, it gets better and better. But it's definitely not as good as Kentaro Miura's. But his detail, absolutely unmatched. And I haven't seen anybody who can draw in detail the way Makoto Yukimura can. It's just unbelievable. So, detail in terms of, like, if a character goes into a room so that there's, confined space, the detail in that room will just be unbelievable. I mean, everything from the designs on the rug to, books in the book. I mean, it's just ridiculous how detailed it is. I mean, in just absolutely phenomenal detail. But one thing that he takes to another level is the detail in a person's face. And I'm not joking. He takes realism to a hyperbolic level. It's just the detail. I mean, it's unbelievable how detailed some of these faces are. So in the later, volumes of Vinland Saga, if you look at King Sewin's face, or Askeladd's face, or Thorfinn's face, I mean, it's just unbelievable the amount of detail he draws in. It's just, like I said, it's absolutely hyperbolic. And it's very, very line oriented. So he likes to use, like, multiple lines to really bring out the detail in a person's face. So it's really line oriented as opposed to, shading oriented. So now just, a quick overview of Vinland Saga. So Vinland Saga is also, a manga that's known for its graphic violence, although not nearly to the extent of Berserk. Um, Vinland Saga is also a revenge story, but it's so much more than that. Oh man, it's so much more than that. Um, so Thor's is, the father of the main character, the father of the protagonist of the story, and he was a legendary warrior who basically went AWOL. And when I say legendary warrior, I really mean like legendary warrior. But he goes AWOL, and what happens is he gets tired of, all the fighting, all the killing. He's, basically was a Viking, or as it's known in the manga, a Jom's Viking. And like I said, he gets tired of all the killing. He gets tired of being a mercenary, and he wants to, become a true warrior. And I think that, within the context of this story, a true warrior, this concept of the true warrior really forms the sort of psychological and philosophical foundation of the story, because this is a motif that comes up, time and time again for, the main character or protagonist. And after Thor's goes AWOL, he has a son named Thorfinn, who's, from a very early age, we can see is just obsessed with obtaining glory on the battlefield, obsessed with the idea of, battle. And like I said before, this is a historical manga, so this is placed, within the context of the war between Denmark and England. And I don't know a lot about that history, but from what I can see in the manga, I think that's basically what's going on. So that there's this war brewing between Denmark and England, and so what happens is the Joms Vikings come back to, say Thor's. We know that you went AWOL. We know that you faked your death. So basically, you have to come back with us and fight in this war. And if you don't, we'll destroy this whole village that you're now part of. And so basically, they have to bring, Thor's back to Denmark. But Thor's gets betrayed and killed. This guy named Floki doesn't want Thor's to come back, and he basically, hires a mercenary group to kill him off. Now, I won't spoil it, but I will say this. Thorfinn Thorfinn is the son of Thor's, and Thorfinn is the main, character, main protagonist of the story. He's directly responsible. In a large way, he's directly responsible for his father's death. So basically, this, breaks Thorfinn, and that it basically breaks him down psychologically. And as a result, he joins the mercenary group that kills his father in order to get revenge on Askeladd, who's the leader of that mercenary group and is the one who, killed his father. And so it's a very, very, psychologically intense manga that deals with the nature of guilt and the nature of redemption, and that basically, even deals with, the nature of revenge and how that's connected to this concept of becoming a true warrior. But like I said, the wider context for this story is, like I said, it's a historical manga, and so this revenge subplot functions as a way of chronicling the war between England and Denmark. And so, another aspect of this story is political intrigue, actually. Um, Towards the later volumes of Vinland Saga, at least the volumes that have been released so far, it's almost entirely about political intrigue. And what's very, very interesting about Vinland Saga, and what, really moves Vinland Saga up into what I think is the cream of the crop, is that there's this very interesting discussion about the psychology of power and how the acquisition of power changes you psychologically and basically drives you insane. It makes you obsessed with power, and it makes you obsessed with acquiring more and more power. Um, so, a large dimension of Vinland Saga is about political intrigue. But let me say this, be forewarned. If you're used to, like, your typical shonen series that where the plot is driven by action, this may not be for you. I'm just letting you know right off the bat that this plot is not driven by action. It's driven by psychology. It's driven by philosophy. Although war is the sort of backdrop to this story, in the later volumes, the war kind of really, really recedes in terms of its importance for the plot. And so basically, what happens is it deals with, it's as the series goes on, and in the later volumes that have been released, it becomes more and more about the psychological transformation of the protagonist. And one way that Makoto Yukimura does this, and I'll be straight honest with you. At one point, the it's like the protagonist is engaged in a fight, and then literally in the next chapter, he's a farmer. Literally, that's literally how it goes, and I mean, it was really, really striking. And I kept thinking that, what the hell's going on? Am I reading this out of order? Because in one chapter, like I said, he's literally engaged in a fight. And then literally in the next chapter, he's a farmer. And he stays a farmer for like a couple of volumes. And so the story becomes about the psychological transformation of the protagonist and political intrigue. So there's like at least maybe 3 or 4 volumes where there's really not a lot of fighting going on at all. So like I said, be forewarned. All right, so the last one that I want to talk about that I've been reading, throughout March is Vagabond by Takehiko Inouye. Another great series, cream of the crop. In terms of the aesthetics, I would say this is the most beautiful artwork. It's definitely the most beautiful artwork. Takehiko is concerned with realism, to be sure, but he has a very distinct style. I think out of all of these, I think all of these series are concerned with realism to a large extent, but I think Takehiko probably achieves this the best. There's not really a lot of, panoramic scenes, no large scale battles because, the story doesn't, require the drawing of those types of scenes. And Takehiko is not obsessed with detail like Yukimura. So like I said, Yukimura is concerned with realism to be sure, but the detail is so hyperbolic that it makes it seem as if, this face is not a real face. So it's so detailed that it's like the detail is too much, and so it kind of warps the realism a little bit. But Takehiko's, his artwork, his style is really characterized by beautiful clean lines, and also the use of shading to kind of, give the face the detail that it needs. And it's also, you can tell it's designed to be aesthetically pleasing. And so I think out of, like I said, out of all the artwork, Takehiko's is the one that most captures, realism, because the faces, they're although they're not, extremely detailed like Yukimura's, they're very clean, very clean. And he's, trying to capture how a face would, really look. Because if you just look at my face right now, if you, make this video 720p and you try to look at my face, you'll see that there's not, not a lot of lines in a human face. If you look, if you, got up close to me, you would see like, little lines, maybe the pores of my skin. But for the most part, a real human face doesn't have a lot of lines. And it's very, clean. And depending on the lighting, there might be some shading that gives detail to my face. So that's the type of, art style that Takehiko has. So since I've only read about 5 volumes, and there's this entire series so far, it's still ongoing. It's 33 volumes. Only thing I can do is, just give you my first impression of, what's been going on so far. So in terms of, what this manga is, what Vagabond is, this manga does multiple things at once. Um, it's at first it's an adaptation of a book that's a fictionalized account of the sword saint Miyamoto Musashi. So a lot of you who are interested in Japanese culture probably know who Miyamoto Musashi hit is. He's probably the most well-known, most highly regarded, and most, renowned samurai of all time. And he also wrote the Book of Five Rings, if you're familiar with that. And the Book of Five Rings is part philosophical treatise, part treatise about, battle tactics and sword fighting. And also, Vagabond is a historical manga that's a sort of fictionalized biography of, Miyamoto Musashi. So it takes place after the battle of the manga starts after the battle of, Sekigahara. And for those of you who don't know, there was a huge, basically what happened was that I believe this was the Sengoku period of Japan. I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Sengoku period, which is basically a period in Japanese history where Japan was split up into multiple warring factions that were, battling for control over, Japan. And so somebody comes along, I forget who it was, but somebody comes along and they basically want to unify Japan. And they ultimately succeed in centralizing their power and unifying Japan to, stop this, the warring factions from basically ripping Japan apart. And what happens is after this person dies, there's, a battle between two, clans who were, brought together under unified Japan, and they now, have a fight to determine who will rule over this, unified Japan in the future. And one of the people well, the head person who was in charge of one faction was, I believe, Tokugawa Ieyasu. And for those of you who, have watched Brave 10, you'll probably immediately recognize who, Ieyasu Tokugawa is. And this is the part um in Japanese history. No. This is one. Well, Tokugawa Ieyasu eventually wins that fight, and he establishes the Tokugawa shogunate. And for those of you who read Rurouni Kenshin, you know that the end of the Tokugawa shogunate was the Bakumatsu, which led to the Meiji Restoration and turned Japan into, a nation state, into a bureaucratic government, and into sort of a quasi democracy. So that's a little, cliff notes on the history of Japan. And so, the historical aspect of this manga is really important to the story. So that's the sort of, backdrop to the story. But the story chronicles the life of Takezo Shinmin, who eventually becomes Miyamoto Musashi. And basically it chronicles the sort of psychological transformation that Takezo has to go through in order to, transform into Miyamoto Musashi. So basically the story is about, this psychological journey that Takezo has to go through. And from a very young age, Takezo has been known for his, very, violent and wild and brutal nature. In fact, he was so strong that at the age of 13 he killed a grown man, man who was actually, a samurai. And so the villagers, shun him, they exile him, they treat him as if he's a pariah, and, they call him demon and beast and, all sorts of things like that. And so basically it happens very early on in the manga, like I said, within the first, actually within the first 3 volumes. Where he's being hunted by the people of his village, and he's eventually captured. And then there's this, monk who captures him, and who, basically is the impetus for this psychological transformation that turns Takezo Shinmen from, a beast with a wild, violent nature into basically, a human being, and starts him on his path of becoming, the most highly regarded samurai of all time. And one thing that's very striking about Takehiko's artwork, and the sort of relationship between his artwork and the philosophical subtext of the story, is that his artwork has a very real, very surrealistic quality to it. So he likes to use a lot of visual metaphors that I really haven't seen in manga before. But you'll immediately recognize it when you see it. And also, as a matter of fact, Yukimura does this a little bit too. It has like this very surrealistic quality to the artwork that's very important for, the philosophy of the story. And so the sort of psychological aspects of the story, combined with these visual metaphors, produces a lot of strong symbolism for the story. So I think, again, that's something that moves Vagabond from just being great up into, the cream of the crop. And it's a very good story. There is some fighting in Vagabond, obviously, because it chronicles how Miyamoto Musashi became the most famous samurai of all time. But again, the story is very, very, psychologically driven. Although it does move at a pretty fast clip. It is very fast paced, and especially that the action sequences are very, very good. Aesthetically, the panel layout is very, very beautiful, and the way he shows the choreography of the fights is also, very, very beautiful. So that's what I've been reading in March, and in April, you'll see this segment come back, and I'll talk about, Vagabond again, because by that time I probably will have finished Vagabond. But also some other upcoming, seinen manga that I plan to read. So like I said, for the next 6 months, man, it's gonna be, only seinen, only manga, straight up seinen binge. So this was your boy Uber Hikari, aka the Nerd Nigga. Just brought you another video with no frills, just the analysis. Peace and have a blessed day.